Welcome to That Dang Dad. My name is Phil. Tonight, I want to talk about hauntology. And in honor of Pride Month, I specifically want to talk about the hauntology of coming out as queer later in life. If you're surprised to hear me bring that up on this channel, it means you didn't watch my previous video on beauty, and shame on you for that. As your internet dad, I order you to go watch that video and Harker the Storyteller's companion video. Anyway, moving on. If you're not sure what hauntology is, don't worry. Tonight, we're going to begin with a brief history of the term, starting with the papi of post-structuralism, Jacques Derrida. Then, we'll talk about big money Mark Fisher and how he played with the concept. But after that, I'm going to get pretty personal and put my own spin on the concept. I think that's what super smarty pants PhDs call autoethnography. The music for tonight was created by me slapping a bunch of reverb and a ping pong delay on What's the Use of Living Without Love by the Tom Clines Orchestra, a shameless ripoff of hauntological musician extraordinaire The Caretaker. The art in this video comes from one of my favorite painters, Edward Hopper. As far as content warnings go, we're looking at some gentle discussion of queer phobia and maybe a little religious trauma thrown in for spice. If that sounds like a rollicking good time to you, let's get started. The term hauntology was coined by Jacques Derrida in his 1993 book, Spectres of Marx. The term is a portmanteau of ontology, meaning the study of what exists, and haunt, meaning to manifest regularly in a ghostly or disturbing way. Derrida is French, and in French, hauntology is pronounced exactly the same way as ontology. Ontologie. Derrida was a big fan of words that sound like other words, and it makes his writing just a real treat to try to follow. Anywho, Derrida coined this term while meditating on the opening sentence of the Communist Manifesto. A specter is haunting Europe, the specter of communism. Knowing Karl Marx to be a fan of William Shakespeare, Derrida uses the play Hamlet to talk about this sentence, kind of the same way that Labor Kyle uses No Man's Sky to talk about late capitalism, or the way Corvidae uses Shrek to talk about queer theory. Was Derrida the original left-tuber? In discussing how Hamlet can be haunted by his dead father and how Europe can be haunted by communism, Derrida coins the term hauntology as a way of showing that you can be weighed upon or tormented by something that isn't really present and isn't really absent, neither truly dead nor alive. Jaques explains, to speak of ghosts in the context of postmodern academic discourse has nothing to do with whether or not one literally believes in the paranormal or supernatural. Spectrality is not about spiritual activity, but a metaphor for the way in which the living present is scarcely as self-sufficient as it claims to be. As metaphors, specters, visible ghosts, challenge basic binary oppositions such as alive and dead, present and absent, past and present. Derrida was a post-structuralist, so he was way into this shit. Post-structuralists believe that when you're studying something, you can't just study the thing itself, you have to study the systems of knowledge that produced that thing. And these systems are full of unspoken biases and assumptions, things that haunt what we think we know. In a 2016 paper, Lena Henriksen puts it like this. By coining hauntology, Derrida aimed to critique the emphasis on presence and immediacy within traditional ontology, by arguing that nothing enjoys a purely positive existence. Indeed, as deconstruction in general is known to argue, all that can be said to be exists due to a series of always deferred and absent others. I'm going to be honest with you, I find Derrida confusing as hell to read, and I really struggle to snip a part out of Spectres of Marx that feels like an easily digestible nug that makes sense all by itself. That's why I haven't quoted him directly. But don't worry about it. You can follow the links in the description and immerse yourself in him all you want. For the purposes of tonight's discussion, all you need to know is this. Hauntology emerged as a way to talk about the way that the absence of something can affect us just as much as the presence of something. Derrida coined the term looking backwards to Europe's past, but another thinker would come along looking forward to the future of the entire world. Longtime viewers of this channel will know that I'm a huge admirer of Mark Fisher. I'm a real fish fiend. One of the ideas that drew me to Mark Fisher in the first place was his thoughts on hauntology, which he often expressed in the context of popular culture. From his position as a music critic in the early 2000s, Fisher saw a pop culture landscape that appeared to be losing its ability to innovate and experiment. A music scene that was producing retro-style sounds that seemed nostalgic, but not for any historical moment in particular. He writes, "While 20th century experimental culture was seized by a recombinatorial delirium, which made it feel as if newness was infinitely available, the 21st century is oppressed by a crushing sense of finitude and exhaustion. It doesn't feel like the future. Or, alternatively, it doesn't feel as if the 21st century has started yet. The slow cancellation of the future has been accompanied by a deflation of expectations. The feeling of belatedness, of living after the gold rush, is as omnipresent as it is disavowed." Fisher was also a fierce critic of neoliberalism and capitalism in general, and he believed that this stagnation of the cultural imagination was a direct result of the dominant political order strangling to death the kinds of futures previous generations were promised would be inevitable. He says, "What haunts the digital cul-de-sacs of the 21st century is not so much the past as all the lost futures that the 20th century taught us to anticipate. The futures that have been lost were more than a matter of musical style. More broadly and more troublingly, the disappearance of the future meant the deterioration of a whole mode of social imagination, the capacity to conceive of a world radically different from the one in which we currently live." Derrida's brilliant insight was that an absence from the past, such as a dead family member or a failed revolution, haunts a person in a way that feels like a presence. I think Fisher's iteration is just as brilliant. The absence of a future can haunt us just as powerfully. Here, I'm thinking of some of my disabled friends who have told me that it's basically impossible for them to imagine ever owning a home due to the cruelty with which businesses and the government treat disabled people. Or I think of some of my friends who are trans women who, barring some amazing miracle in modern science, will never have the experience of carrying a child or giving birth. These are aspirational images of the future broadcast endlessly by popular culture that some of my friends have been locked out of. Fisher's hauntology honors the fact that just because the future hasn't actually arrived doesn't mean people aren't still tormented by the things that haven't not happened yet. Though, for Fisher, a haunting isn't just being bummed about this slow cancellation of the future. There's something slightly more active happening. He writes, "Haunting, then, can be construed as a failed mourning. It is about refusing to give up the ghost or, and this can sometimes amount to the same thing, the refusal of the ghost to give up on us. The specter will not allow us to settle into or settle for the mediocre satisfactions one can glean in a world governed by capitalist realism." I think about this passage a lot. I mean, what a phrase, failed mourning. Sometimes when I read this passage, I read it with a sense of bleakness, like we failed to make peace with the loss and its ghost won't let us forget it, won't let us be satisfied. But other times, I read this passage with a spark of radical hope. Perhaps what we've lost is too important to merely accept. Maybe we shouldn't be satisfied by dwindling table scraps when we know there's enough food on the table to fill everyone's bellies. Maybe this failed morning can spur us to expand our horizon of the thinkable once more. Of course, that's a personal journey each of us has to work out in our own hearts. And I suppose that means it's time for me to talk about my own hauntological journey. If you watched my previous video on beauty, you know that I revealed to the world that I am bisexual. While a few people knew that about me, and while I wasn't exactly subtle about it on Twitter, that's one of the first times I've said it out loud in a public forum for strangers to hear. And I did so at the tender age of 38. That said, looking back, I know I've been somewhere on the sparkling queer spectrum since middle school. Unfortunately, I grew up in a very religious family as part of a very fundamentalist sect of Christianity. Where's my fellow survivors of the Southern Church of Christ out there? Can I get an amen? To give you an example of what church was like for me, our church was considered a liberal Church of Christ because we clapped for people after they got baptized. If a woman was leading a women's Bible study and a man walked in the room to grab a chair, the woman would stop speaking because women were not permitted to instruct men. And from a very young age, we were taught about the existence of hell and how eternal torture was waiting for those who displeased our loving God. The potlucks were pretty good though. But yeah, it shouldn't surprise you that any kind of queer identity was just unthinkable in this environment. So as I started to awkwardly lurch into puberty and discover the mysteries of my body, I discovered I had some unthinkable thoughts surfacing late at night. I didn't find this confusing at first because the answer was obvious. Satan was putting bad thoughts into my head to lead me away from God and into the fires of hell. Duh, that's like his whole job. So this ushered in nearly 2 decades marked by a constant repetition of thinking queer thoughts, pleasuring myself, feeling shame, repenting and begging God for forgiveness, lather, rinse, repeat. Once we got the internet, I spent many nights up late on AOL chatting with older fellas. Sometimes much older fellas. It wasn't until I watched Kaylin Conrad's video about queer rage that it occurred to me, oh shit, I was being groomed. But hey, nothing bad ended up happening, so no harm done, right? Sex, and especially queerness, was such a taboo topic in my church and in my family that I never felt like I could talk to anyone about this stuff. And besides, I figured it was just normal. I figured Satan was putting these thoughts in everyone's head, and everyone was constantly undergoing the same shame spirals that I was. After all, so much of my church experience involved performative repentance and declaring that we were all sinners deserving of death, that we were broken vessels, that here on earth we were literally dragging around bodies of death and would only be delivered from them on the other side. I think I had my first queer thoughts when I was 11, and I didn't fully internalize and accept my own queerness until I was about 30. That's 19 years of shame and denial and avoidance. 19 years of letting a part of myself just atrophy. And that brings us to my iteration on hauntology. In 2017, I began volunteering as a mentor with a queer teen outreach here in Louisville. From the first time I attended the meetups, I was astounded by what I saw. Kids from the ages of 12 to 20 were talking candidly and articulately about their genders, their sexualities, and with no judgment or malice, they were guided by older mentors and each other into healthy relationships with their bodies and their attractions. Kids would discuss the most private and sometimes traumatic parts of their lives in front of a group of 50 others and receive a bombardment of love and understanding. They didn't hide things that felt confusing or strange. They shared them with their peers and they worked on them together. And through these relationships, they connected to a long history of queer survival and queer activism. They were part of a big, storied family, heirs to an important legacy secured by blood. Growing up, I never had anything like that as a closeted queer. I had basically zero lexicon for understanding my feelings and no one to help me learn about them in a safe way. My entire early queer experience was spent in chat rooms and instant messages with people who probably didn't have my best interests at heart. And this was followed by awkward, sleazy Craigslist hookups in my 20s. My relationship to sex to this day is pretty fucked up thanks to religious trauma and closeted exploration. And beyond that, I've been almost entirely disconnected from queer history and the struggle for queer liberation. What would my life look like if I hadn't grown up in a toxic religious environment? What would be different if I'd had a community of fellow queer kids around to help me process and understand myself better? What could I have learned from and added to the struggle for liberation in the 90s and 2000s if I hadn't been pretending I wasn't part of the community? For me, the hauntological subject in my life is the me I'd be today in that alternate universe. It's not quite Derrida's ghost of the past, although I do mourn the time I lost to shame and self-loathing, and it's not quite Fisher's ghost of a lost future. For me, it's a lost present, a now I can't have, in which I know how to talk about these things better, in which all sides of my sexuality come easily to me, in which I'm another queer elder who put in the hard work and has lots of insight to offer the next generation about coming out, fighting for your rights, and navigating the intricacies of queer love. When I'm at one of these outreach events as a mentor, learning from 16-year-olds, I am acutely aware of my lack. But don't get me wrong, I have an amazing life today. I have a spouse who I love deeply and who loves me back. I have an incredible daughter who brings joy to my life every day. I have parents, a sister, and in-laws who form a loving local family unit who take care of each other. I wouldn't trade any of these things away for that ghostly me that could have been. And I think that's what I find so interesting about my experience with hauntology. I know it's pointless to obsess over how things could have been. I know the me thinking these thoughts is the sum total of my experiences, and I'm happy with my life today. I don't want to be that other me, but I can't shake his presence all the same. So, is this a failed morning? Am I refusing to give up the ghost? Is he refusing to give me up? I don't actually know. On the one hand, I found peace with the way things shook out, but on the other hand, I'm not satisfied. I missed out on over 19 years of queer camaraderie and queer activism, and I can't just sit on the sidelines. I think for me, where I'm at, my hauntological subject is my accomplice now. When I was 11, the universe forked, and he and I parted ways. But now, we've found each other again on opposite sides of an impenetrable void, but somehow still in communication. He's spurring me on to use my talents and privileges to uplift the next generation of young queers, saying, better late than never. And I guess I'm encouraging him to, I don't know, show more grace to the clumsy late bloomers out there who didn't have all his advantages. Is that what he's making a video essay about right now? Does he have more subs than me? Derrida, Fisher, and I all think about hauntology a little bit differently. But I suspect we would all agree on one thing. It's not practical to try to exorcise the ghosts from your life. It's more important to find a way to work with them to create something beautiful. Well, there you go. There's my hauntological subject. What's yours? Are you haunted by a Derridian past, a Fisherian future, or a Dang-Daddian present? Or are you also a latecomer to the queer clam bake? How do you feel about it? Do you feel like you lost time too? Have you experienced a failed morning, or have you found peace? Let us know in the comments.
Chuds and gatekeepers, be warned. I have the power to make your comments actually absent, with no presence capable of haunting anyone else. Don't make me banish you to the liminal spaces within YouTube.
If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't, but as always, please share this video with someone you think it might resonate with. I really appreciate you spending time with me tonight. I realize this is kind of an odd contribution to #pride content, but I'm guessing I'm not the only person who grew up religious and has to deal with all this shit. If you did too, I hope this video makes you feel seen. Thanks again for watching. Happy Pride. Liberation, not assimilation, and I hope to see you on the next one. Good night.